Tachi, can we start?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, good morning, everyone. We hope everyone's having a great, chilly time because, Tom, it's the winter starting here in Brazil. So it's very nice. I'm all wearing a sweater and completely different from Texas. I wanted to say good morning to everyone. We have a special edition of our compliance evangelist here, and Cynthia and I decided that probably we will not say a word because we really want Tom to explain everything in the 1 hour that he has. Cynthia, please, I spoke too much already.
No, no, exactly. I just want to make sure, and I'll switch to Portuguese briefly. Nessa edição, nós não vamos ter tradutor. Então, quem precisar, é só clicar no mais. Aí, o primeiro ícone é gravar e transcrever. Clicar ali, e aí você terá a opção de legendas. E também, por ser uma edição especial, não teremos uma convidada especial.
Verdade, nós tínhamos sim uma pessoa.
Switching back to English, Tom, I was giving instructions on our chat here today, and also letting the three of us. And we all look very much forward to hear what you have to say about what's happening in the US and how that ultimately impacts us in Brazil.
Exactly. So just 1 second before Tom starts, Tom very generously gave us a white paper on this last change with the memo of June the 9th. And we have prepared the document in 2 columns in Portuguese and English that will be distributed to all of you who are here today. So I guess that without further ado, Tom, please tell us everything. And then, of course, we'll leave some time for questions in the Q&R in the Portuguese PA. Okay?
Thank you, ladies, both. I'm going to start by announcing that I'm going to introduce a podcast in Portuguese next month. So you're the first to hear that. But I will have a Tom Fox podcast in Portuguese for all of your listeners. So watch for that. The last month, or excuse me, a couple of weeks ago, the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, in the U.S. we call that the DAG, the DAG, issued a memo on the Trump administration's focus for FCPA enforcement. This memo followed President Trump's suspension of the FCPA that we talked about in an earlier visit we had, I believe in March. And the memo has several significant either changes or perhaps even just refocusing that I think are going to be very important for Brazilian compliance professionals. And that's why I wanted to visit with you all today about this. It begins by reiterating this administration's concerns about cartels and foreign terrorist organizations, and emphasizes that if you are in any way associated with a cartel or a foreign terrorist organization, known or unknown, whether you do it intentionally or not, you're going to get in very big trouble with this administration. Now, I would assume everyone on this call would say very stridently, Tom, we don't do business with terrorists. We don't do business with cartels. And I would expect that. The problem is the cartels particularly are very sophisticated in their use of shell corporations. And if you're shipping products up from Latin America through Central America into the United States, there may be a cartel footprint somewhere in that chain. But that is, this administration has made clear In other memos, they're focused on cartels, but here they've tied it to the FCPA. And what that means is you can get in additional trouble, and potentially, if there's U.S. jurisdiction over your company could be investigated and or have an enforcement action. Of course, whistleblowers are a key part of the DOJ now. This started under the Biden administration, where they created a whistleblower incentive program. So you're going to need to have a robust internal reporting system. There's one other item that is a change, however, and this is something that you will need to pay attention to, and it's what the administration calls a competitive disadvantage. Let me see if I can actually find the language. But it says that if a foreign company, meaning not a U.S. company, engages in bribery and corruption, and U.S. companies are put at a competitive disadvantage, or resulted in an economic injury specific to and identifiable from American companies, then that's going to be a reason for FCPA enforcement. And we've not had that before. What that means is if you win a bid against a U.S. company and you've engaged in bribery and corruption, the U.S. government may well investigate you. What I don't know, and we don't know at this point, is will there be cooperation with the Brazilian authorities on this? That's just an open question at this point. But if you are in a third country such as Mexico, a third country in West Africa, a third country anywhere else, and your company wins a bid, and a U.S. company thinks you've engaged in bribery and corruption, you may find yourself under an investigation. And that is something new. So it's, I would say it's unusual for a compliance officer to know about the bids, individual bids that business units make, certainly in a large multinational corporation. But you may need to try and find out or figure out a way to track that so that you can begin to look at that issue about bids against U.S. companies. Business as usual is going to be fine, but if there's bribery and corruption involved, the U.S. government may want to take a look at you. Second, and this next part really cuts both ways. The DOJ, one of the complaints about FCPA enforcement for years has been how long it takes. 5, 6, 7 years. And to go from initial report to resolution. Well, this Department of Justice wants to end that, or at least compress that time frame, and they want what they call expedited investigations, or proceed as expeditiously as possible. So that means as quickly as possible. Now that's the focus for the prosecutors. I think that puts more pressure on us, the compliance professionals, the in-house compliance professionals, to identify issues, internally investigate issues, turn over or not to the Department of Justice, meaning self-disclosed. But you're going to have to move quickly, because the Department of Justice is going to want you to move quickly. And if you're on this call, like Isabella, who's outside counsel, who may be, and Cynthia as well, who may be involved in investigations or a part of investigations, I think it means that you will have more pressure to do things more quickly, so the Department of Justice can make a decision. Now, some may welcome this and say, you know, this is what we've wanted for a long time, Tom. Others may say we move as quickly as we can, and recognizing there may be witnesses across the globe. There may be documents in different places. We may have to do interviews in multiple countries of multiple persons. I've done all of those. I understand all of that. But The reality is if the prosecutors have been told to move quickly, they will expect you to move quickly. And it's not just the Isabellas and the Cynthias of the worlds. It is the in-house compliance professionals of the worlds who will need to do that. So we'll have expedited investigations, and I'll leave it to you whether that's a good thing or could put more pressure on you to mobilize and get information to the regulators. Next, the memo instructs prosecutors to consider what's called, quote, collateral consequences, end quote. Now, collateral consequences are consequences of business disruption that happen because of an investigation and or an enforcement action. Previously, prosecutors would look at the collateral consequences of an enforcement action, meaning at the end. But now prosecutors are mandated to look at the collateral consequences during an investigation. This may mean that you, if you are defense counsel and you're negotiating with the U.S. government or reporting to the U.S. government, you can claim we can't do that because it would disrupt our business. Now, whether those claims will be successful or not, we don't know at this point because we have no examples. But you should be prepared to advocate early and often about the operational integrity of your business and demonstrate that you are cooperating, and anything else the DOJ might want would be sort of too far. So it may be of some help to you. One of the things I mentioned, the sort of competitive disadvantage and the economic impact on U.S. companies. Well, the Trump administration has elevated that to a national security interest. We previously had corruption defined as a national security interest of the United States, and that was done under the Biden administration. But now we have actual economic well-being of U.S. companies as a national security interest. And that just raises the stakes a little bit higher on FCPA and similar investigations. This Department of Justice claims that they're going to prosecute individuals. And if you have been on any of these morning breakfasts with Tom Fox for however many years we've been doing it, you have heard that this DOJ says we're going to prosecute individuals. Nothing new in that. That's been an emphasis since at least 2015. But what the Department of Justice has said is if there's a structural failure, meaning your internal controls or policies and procedures, we may not look as closely at that. Now, that may sound like something good. Problem with that is twofold. Number one, it takes people to make structures fail. So if you have an internal control, and someone overrides that internal control or someone disregards that internal control, that means they have done so intentionally to create a pot of money to pay a bribe. That's an intentional act. So there could well be liability. But the second part of the problem is the Department of Justice has never prosecuted companies for failures, structural failures. In 15 years, I can think of one FCPA prosecution for failure of internal controls. But it is a focus of the Securities and Exchange Commission. And the Securities and Exchange Commission in the United States prosecutes civil matters, not criminal matters, and they do look at internal control failures. So I'm not sure the Department of Justice saying we're not going to look at corporate structures and structural failures any longer. I'm not sure they ever did. And when the Department of Justice says we want to look at individuals, they always said that, or at least for the last 10 years. So I'm not quite sure that's new. One of the next parts is it says that the Department of Justice will deprioritize de minimis FCPA violations. So here you can think of companies that may have gotten in trouble over facilitation payments or some sort of minor payments. But once again, the the Department of Justice has never prosecuted companies for de minimis FCPA violations. If you violate facilitation payments by making a payment of too much, and the lowest payment we've ever seen referenced was $1,000, that's never the basis of an enforcement action. It's just additional evidence of a corrupt corporate culture.
Tom,
So-
if I may interject just for the benefit of our listeners, we use the expression de minimis a lot in English in all of our legalese. Could you explain that with a little bit more detail, please?
Sure. So, what's the threshold of money that's going to get you in trouble? Is it $100? Is it $1,000? Is it $5,000? Is it $10,000? First of all, if you can pay a bribe of $1,000 and get a contract, good for you. You've got a great deal.
That was cheap.
Nobody takes a bribe for $1,000 and gives you a contract in the international arena. Maybe locally, maybe not. But to get a major contract of several $100,000 or millions of dollars, you're going to pay either one time or multiple times a lot of money. And so to say you can get a benefit that would qualify as an FCPA violation for $100, for $1,000, for $5,000, I think it doesn't happen. Now, you may make multiple payments of $5,000, but they're all going to add up. I think this department, unless you can show evidence of a payment of totaling, not one time, but so I think $10,000 is going to be the sort of minimum range. Now that can be 10 $1,000 payments. Don't walk away from this thinking, well, Tom said $1,000 is okay. They're going to add it up. But if you have $1,000 payment and you get a contract in the international arena, like I said, good for you. But second of all, it never happens. So not going to be good for you. Lunches, dinners, football tickets, meals, all of those things, I think, are not going to be scrutinized very closely. I used to use the example of what's the difference in a ticket to a league football game, to a Copa Cup ticket, to a World Cup ticket, the difference in prices. I think you don't have to worry about that now. If you want to send people to the Olympics in 2026, first of all, don't come to the United States, period. But if you make the decision to send customers to the United States, I think that's all going to be fine, and you can do things like that. So does that give you a better sense, Isabel?
Yes, thank you so much. It's just
Okay.
because we don't have an interpreter today. I think that some of the expressions that are very used in the United States, but not commonly heard here in Brazil. That was a great explanation. Thank you.
I think you can spend more on gifts, meals, travel, etc., than you did previously, if you're so inclined to do so. And you're not going to, I don't think you'll get in trouble under this administration. The last thing is foreign, what we would call in the United States, foreign prosecution, what you would call in Brazil, domestic prosecution. So if the United States uncovers investigation or uncovers bribery and corruption of a Brazilian company, one of the factors is, will Brazil investigate and or enforce under their domestic anti-corruption laws? Same for the United Kingdom, same for France, same for Germany, same for China, because all of those countries I've named have anti-corruption laws. So the U.S. will look at prosecution by foreign, what we would call a foreign prosecutor, what you would call our prosecutors. So that's another part of the calculus. Here, I really don't know how much I can guide you because one, under this administration, relationships with countries are very fluid. And right now, the United States is very mad at South Africa for reasons I can't fathom. And so they may not defer to a South African prosecutor. what the relationship between the United States and Brazil is today may not be what it is 6 months from now. So it's difficult to assess this point, but it seems to say in the document, if your country has an anti-corruption law and you have a prosecution service who will investigate and prosecute it, the U.S. may defer to your domestic prosecution. So that's sort of, I think, a summary of what I think the highlights are. I'd like to give maybe 3 or 4 points that I would ask you to consider as takeaways. So I think this puts more pressure on us. I think this puts more pressure on you. I think this puts more pressure to know what your company is doing in high-risk geographies, high-risk jurisdictions that potentially foreign government officials could be bribed. Because now you have to worry about, did we pay a bribe? Did we get a contract? And did a U.S. company not get that contract? So any energy service company in Brazil, that's a Brazilian energy service company that does business routinely with Petrobras, that competes with a Halliburton, with a Schlumberger, with a Weatherford, with a you name the U.S. company, probably needs to look at your own internal compliance program, and you need to look at it for the rest of the world. Investigative response. We have talked about, I think, for at least the last year, the need for a robust internal investigative protocol that starts with your hotline, your anonymous reporting, your culture of speak up. Once that report comes in, once someone sends in an anonymous report, once someone raises their hand and speaks up, it's now over to you. You have to triage that. You have to get the investigation done. And then you have to be ready to pick up the phone and call on Isabella or Cynthia if needed. So you need to stress test your own internal investigative protocol. And then this focus on not low level or not de minimis or not things like that. I think this is, I don't want to say a great opportunity, but it may relieve some overall stress you would have if you do the following. If you have documented what you've spent and how you've spent or documented how your investigative protocol, and you detect and prevent serious misconduct, I think that's going to be a plus for you. And if the Department of Justice comes down and says, well, we've heard that you sent someone to U.S. Super Bowl championship, we want to talk to you about that. And then you can just show them that we're not worried about sending people to American football games or Brazilian football games. We're focused on serious misconduct, and here's why. I think it gives you the opportunity to have that conversation. So it's not all doom and gloom. I think clearly there's going to be a focus on this economic competition issue in a way that we haven't before. But because of the speed that the DOJ wants as expeditiously as possible, and that the collateral consequences, you can talk to them, this is disrupting our company's business, and here's how we've lost money. And then if you show that this is really what we've called de minimis and not a major serious violation, and here's how we're focused on the major serious work, I think you can have perhaps a more robust response if a regulator comes knocking. So I know I gave a lot of information there, so maybe it's time to turn it over to you all or for comments or questions.
Excellent.
I have a question. Sorry, Belle.
No,
And
go ahead.
it's more of a commentary really on your part. We saw when the FCPA got suspended that a lot of prosecutors left or were reshuffled internally within the DOJ. Do you anticipate a strengthening of the unit since the publication of this new ordinance, or do you think they will remain short-staffed, and our role will really be to make sure we survive, the next 4 years to make sure that we don't pay for this later.
I thought
Great
I
question,
understood your
Cynthia.
question, but that seemed to be two different parts. The first part was, what about the reduction in the FCPA unit? But this survival part, you lost me there.
Oh, no, I mean, are we just surviving the next political wave of maybe non-enforcement? I would imagine that with half the amount of prosecutors, it will be hard to maintain any true commitment to enforcement and monitoring.
When you say we, who's the we in that?
Oh, I mean, the corporate sector, our clients, the individuals on this webinar.
Oh, okay. So I think this means that there'll be more pressure on us, we, and I think that it will give you the opportunity to really stress test your program in true high-risk jurisdictions. Now, if we have a change in administration in now 3 years, we may go back to a different type of enforcement. But right now, you need to maybe refocus your program on where do you really have risk? Do you do business with government officials or foreign government officials? Do you do business in the typical industries? But it's really any industry now. I used to say I've come out of the energy industry, so we talk about extractive industries, but it's extractive, it's pharma, it's manufacturing, it's telecom, it's financial services. So really every industry is a part of this, but I think you can look at sort of the highest risk you have and test that, but you need to add this new risk of economic disadvantage to U.S. companies. If you're winning a lot of bids because your bid is better, you're a better provider of services or products, you deliver better service, that's great, but you have to be prepared to document that.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And João-Elec, Tom, has a commentary on what you spoke, and you may remember that João-Elec was the compliance officer for, I know that they have a different name for title for that position, but during the Lava Jato. So here's is what he says. Authorities demanding expedited investigations can be expected always. In Brazil, authorities have been very lazy to expedite investigations and inquiries about a massive fraud on retirement and pension payments, allowing fraudsters to destroy evidences and proofs. So, do you have anything to say about how globally authorities deal with things in a different way? Here in Brazil, for example, the government never wants to expedite anything. That's what he's saying.
I think it's going to be literally on a country by country basis. Every prosecutorial service moves at their own speed. The Serious Fraud Office in the United Kingdom or Great Britain has changed directors, so they have a different focus now. The PNF in France moves at the speed of the French. You've mentioned Brazil. What this means for U.S. prosecutors, it's unknown because we have no examples. And I probably should have highlighted that a little bit more, Isabel, that this is a written document. I have no examples, no enforcement actions, no declinations that I can bring to you to say, they said they were going to do this and they did it. So as we would say in America, the proof is in the pudding. Are we actually going to see this put into practice at this point? I don't know the answer to that. And so it's an open question. And as I'm sure you are aware, this administration changes its focus on a lot of things on a daily basis. So I can't tell you tomorrow what today the rules are will be the same tomorrow. But I can tell you what they said they were going to be. So there's really nothing I can point you to say this change has occurred. So it's a big way of saying, I don't know the answer to that question.
Excellent, Tom. I was going to ask you to then explore a little more this whole question about how the administration changes its mind every day. As we say here in Portuguese, it's they change their minds as they change their clothes every day. Because it gives a lot of insecurity. And it seems that they went from one extreme to the other, and now the suspension has been suspended. And is it really back? And I know this is given your disclaimer that we don't know yet. But I was mentioning to Cynthia before the webinar started that you're there in the United States, so you're kind of hearing all of the talk about it, and we here in Brazil are not. So we just wanted to get your feelings about it.
It literally depends on one person, and that's the president. If somebody talks to him and he changes his mind, it will change. And that's sort of certainly what you've seen with tariffs, but we've had other laws as well, that someone has spoken to him and he has changed his mind, and he doesn't tell the people around him, he just announces it. So it could happen. I don't know. We don't know. We don't know if he'll get interested in the FCPA again.
Very good. We know that he left the meeting at the Geo 20s or whatever 7 yesterday because he said he's very concerned with the war in the Middle East, so he just left. So maybe tomorrow he says, someone asks him, how about the FCPA? And he says, what? FCPA, right?
Well,
But
he's on record as saying the FCPA is a horrible law, and that's not new. He said that a long time ago, and that's how he feels about it. And if somehow this gets back in front of him and gets his attention, he could say it again and say, I don't want to ever see this again. And that would potentially suspend all enforcement. So
right.
It's possible.
Okay. Thank you. I want to encourage all of you to place your questions or comments in the Q&R, and they can be in Portuguese. Just identify yourself and the organization you're with, and Cynthia and I will pick up your, like I said, it doesn't have to be a question. It could be a commentary. It's just that the format that we usually have with Tom is that people participate through the chat. Cynthia, do you have any other question? I have.
I see a question here from Diane Nabucco. She's actually from my team, from Charles River Associates. And we were all, Tom, looking very much forward to this webinar because this is all so new. And her question is, how have U.S. markets reacted to the return of the FCPA enforcement? Do investors and companies see this as a real change with serious consequences, or more like a formal announcement without much practical impact?
That's a really good question. The answer is closer to the latter or the second part. I would say for the market, it's been a very collective ho-hum. The markets are not concerned with FCPA enforcement. The markets are concerned with your company and its commitment to doing business ethically and in compliance.
Great point.
Because the markets say if your company engages in bribery and corruption, number one, you have a corrupt culture. Number two, you're going to get caught. And number three, it's not a sustainable business model. You can do it maybe for a few years, but eventually something goes wrong and you lose the contract. If you've never paid a bribe and you have contracts, legitimate contracts on the up and up, that's what the market wants to see. And when I say the market, I mean the U.S. stock market. So the New York Stock Exchange, if you're a publicly listed company, if you are trying to get funding for your company, whether that's a bank loan or investment dollars, whether it's private equity or private investors, they're going to want to review your compliance program. If you see yourself as a potential acquisition target, you want to sell your company, you're a smaller company and want to sell out, they're going to want to look at your compliance program because they want to make sure they're not buying a violation, whether it's an export control violation, whether it's a sanctions violation, or whether it's an FCPA violation. So the market's response is, I think, ho-hum to enforcement, but that, let me contrast that specifically with the market's response to, do you have a compliance program? Is it robust? And if you don't, I don't want to have anything to do with you.
Right. I was one point of your talk earlier, Tom, that caught my attention was when you talked about the prosecution of individuals, in that you said the DOJ has always never really prosecuted a company for failure to of internal controls, but SEC, yes. And then you went on to explain that it prosecutes civil matters and not criminal matters. So I just wanted you to tell us a little bit more about this difference, because I think that it's always extremely important. And I always speak with clients about books and records, and always tell them not to only focus on the DOJ, because the sanctions of the SEC can be even higher.
Well, it's very biblical.
Ah,
Thou shalt not pay a bribe. That's part one. If thou does pay a bribe, the DOJ will prosecute you potentially criminally. That's the criminal side. Part two, if thou violates internal controls, the SEC will prosecute you, but that will be civilly. So there's two parts of the FCPA, the anti-bribe part, and then what's called books and records. Books and records says you have to have effective internal controls and you have to have your accounting in order. So accounting violations and internal controls make up books and records. That's what the SEC looks at. If you pay a bribe, and to pay a bribe, you have to have a pot of money to pay a bribe. And no one makes enough money in their own salary to pay a bribe, or to create a pot of money to pay a bribe, I should say. So you have to steal it from the company. How do you steal it? You call it a marketing expense. You divert funds. You bake it into the contract. You do something. Well, if you do that, and then let's focus on the marketing. Say you claim marketing monies of several $1 million, and that's your pot of money to pay a bribe. Well, your books and records are not correct. Your accounting is not correct. That's one violation. Now, how were you able to get a pot of money in your marketing budget that was used to pay a bribe? That means you've either overridden or ignored your internal controls. That's your internal controls violation. So you can have two separate violations under books and records. Your accounting is not correct, and then your internal controls failed. So that's where the SEC would prosecute you. And there's a 6-year statute of limitation on the books and records part. So that means if you engage in that now, because you don't think the DOJ is going to look at you, if there's a new administration in a couple of years, that they may well want to look at your books and records. So always remember, the FCPA has two parts: thou shalt not pay a bribe, criminal, and then the books and records. They have to be correct.
correct. So in that case, may I summarize it in that the SEC will definitely, or not definitely, but is the regulator, the authority that will prosecute the individual, or obviously the DOJ can do the same, but criminally. Is that correct?
Correct. And typically the SEC will focus on companies and these structural issues.
Okay. Do you have any examples that you can give us through the history? You know, I know that, for instance, Odebrecht and Braskem had to negotiate with both of them. And the whole story behind the process, the individuals is something that I'm always curious to hear from someone in the States. If you remember, if you have it on the top of your head.
So are you interested in hearing about stories of individual prosecutions or
Yes.
something different?
No,
So
individuals.
individual prosecutions, we've had, a series of individuals prosecuted, most recently, and when I say most recently, starting about 2020, we had a series of cases involving oil traders, energy trading companies, and we had Vitol, Glencore, and a couple of more, where the energy traders were paying bribes to either buy or sell gas on the spot market. They were doing it in Latin America. They were doing it in Africa. They were doing it in the Far East, although the companies were typically headquartered in Europe. And so not only were the companies prosecuted, as were some of the large Brazilian companies, but numerous individuals, traders in each one of those companies was individually prosecuted. So typically in a very big case, we would see individual prosecutions, and then the largest fine would be paid by the company.
Correct. I thought this was a good point because it's always misunderstood, I think, outside of the United States. And since that may change, although, as you said before, it's very hard to predict, it's something that I always call my um, clients' attentions as to not to forget the prosecution of individuals. Cynthia, anything or?
So I see another question here. I think, Tom, if you could comment on the cartels and transnational criminal component of the interpretation of the law. I think prior to, the last several months, we had never heard so much emphasis on cartels and transnational criminal organizations as they apply to the FCPA. So if you could comment, I think that's what Rodrigo would like to hear from you on that point.
Sure. So I would say the cartels, at least the ones I'm most aware of, are largely in Mexico. So let's just focus on Mexico. So 5 years ago, I would get a call every once in a while that would be along the lines of the following. Tom, we're an energy company. We're doing business in Mexico. Our drivers are being pulled over and asked to pay protection money to deliver oil supplies. Is that an FCPA violation? Answer, no, because it was the cartels who were pulling these trucks over, not the Mexican government, not Mexican army. So no FCPA violation. Now, however, the U.S. government has designated cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. That's a completely different level of bad actor in the U.S. government's eyes. Same fact scenario, drivers paying 50 pesos, 100 pesos, whatever it is, to deliver their product. Now, your company is facilitating a foreign terrorist organization. Your company is 100% liable for that payment. We had a very bad case several years ago out of Syria, where a French company, Holcim, paid protection money to ISIS so they could run a cement plant in Syria. And they got in huge trouble because even back then, ISIS was a foreign terrorist organization. So they were prosecuted by the U.S. government. They were prosecuted by the French government. So there's a model in place for that. Specifically, when it comes to cartels, though, cartels are very sophisticated. This is not somebody selling dime bags of heroin on a street corner that you're doing business with. This is somebody, organization is a multi-billion-dollar organization with lots of accountants, keeping track of the money, and shell corporations set up to launder that money. Because remember, cartels have to launder the cash they get for their selling of their products. So you may be doing business with a shell company that you think is a legitimate company, but you've done no background due diligence on them because you're using them for cleaning services, secretarial services, or some other services that you think is low risk. Well, it turns out it's a shell corporation for a cartel that the cartel can then use to launder money. You are now engaged in a violation of U.S. law because you're supporting a foreign terrorist organization. What that means is if you're doing business in any of those countries where there are cartels who have been redesignated as foreign terrorist organizations, you need to look at all of the vendors in your supply chain, and you need to do some assessment of are they who they say they are. Whether you call that due diligence, whether you call that whatever you may call that within your internal company or your internal company's own protocols, you need to be aware of that and make sure you're not doing business with a company who may actually be a shell corporation for a cartel.
And Tom, have you
Cynthia,
heard
somehow I'm not getting the questions, so if
Oh,
there
okay.
are questions there, please go ahead.
Okay. Have you heard anything as to how the U.S. government, has the U.S. government commented, or has anyone commented on whether the Brazilian criminal organizations, the PCC and the Comando Vermelho, what they would be considered under U.S. interpretation or U.S. law as it applies to the FCPA?
I have not heard whether they've been designated as a foreign terrorist organization. But the FCPA doesn't make that specific distinction to be designated as a foreign terrorist organization. That's an entire different law that has its own consequences. Here, this memo spoke about cartels and foreign designated terrorist organizations. So if it's a cartel in your country, you may be at risk.
They're really a powerful criminal organization. They're
Mhm.
drug dealers. But I don't think that they work the same way that the Mexican companies do. I heard of the cartels, the Mexican cartels actually will stall a construction and ask you not only for money, but they want to include their own personnel on your payroll without obviously these people working for the company. So there's a way of bribery here that is more sophisticated than I think that the BCC here in Brazil works. They have different methods, and it's harder to find what a cartel is once they're all criminal organizations. But I'm sorry, did you see any other questions? Somehow I'm getting the chat, but not the Q&R.
So I don't think we have, let me see, hold on. Oh, there's one more question here. And it's, I think this person would like Tom to comment on what prompted a higher focus on individual executive enforcement against individuals. What's changed in the past years and what prompted that focus? If
Well,
Tom could comment.
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't make it clear. Nothing has changed since at least 2015. The Department of Justice has said we will prosecute individuals. They always say that.
Okay.
So there's really no change there at all.
Okay. And do you know what prompted in 2015? Have there been more enforcement against individuals?
There's always been enforcement against individuals. In 2015, it was called the Yates Memo, and they made a lot of public noise about prosecuting individuals, and maybe it went up a little bit,
Okay.
but they'd always prosecuted individuals. Actually, I remember, if you want the history, in 2010, there was a huge prosecution of individuals in the armament industry or the gun industry in America. And there was 20 or 25 individuals were arrested and charged with FCPA violation. And the DOJ made the decision they would go to trial with 4 groups of 6. So 4 trials of 6 people. And it was an absolute disaster for the Department of Justice. The first trial, it was a hung jury, meaning no verdict. The second trial, they were all found innocent. And so they dropped the rest of the prosecutions. And so that was 2010, 2011. And for several years afterwards, the department did not aggressively go after individuals. And then in 2015, under the H memo, they said, well, we're going to start that again. So I've forgotten that history of it was called the gun sting case. And it was an absolute disaster for the Department of Justice.
Great. Cynthia, if there's no more questions in the Q&R, I wanted to go back to a point that always strikes us and here in Brazil has been the subject of a lot of heat lately is your favorite subject, self-reporting. Does it make any difference now that they say they want to expedite the investigations? And in one of your breakfasts, Tom, I remember you saying that when a company finally decided to go and self-report, there was a reporter actually in a TV channel, I don't remember what the story was, that got the story first. So that was not considered a voluntarily self-report.
Well, actually, a month before this memo, there's a whole series of memos from the Department of Justice on self-reporting, different enforcement priorities, and whistleblower programs that we didn't get to today because we talked about the FCPA. And that set of memos, and I'm happy to do a presentation on that. We didn't have time for both today. The Department of Justice announced a new corporate enforcement policy to try to make it a bigger carrot to self-disclose. And the carrot is, there was always a carrot that if you self-disclosed, remediated, cooperated in your investigation, and paid back your ill-gotten gains or profit disgorgement, the presumption would be you would get a declination. Well, somehow the Department of Justice said that for sure you'll get a declination, except if there are aggravating circumstances. And aggravating circumstances are where you have senior executive involvement in the bribery scheme. The change they made was that you can get even if you have senior executive involvement or these aggravating circumstances, you can get a 75% discount off the low end of the fine range. And that the situation you mentioned, Isabel, where literally company called up, said, we're going to come in Wednesday to self-report. On Tuesday, the press in that country broke the story, so they didn't get self-disclosure credit. The DOJ said, if you've made an attempt in good faith to self-disclose, that's going to be good enough. So you can still get self-disclosure credit if you don't make that magic deadline. So those were the two big changes, but those are a whole set of policy memos that were released in May.
Well, Belle, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, if there are no more questions, I was going to mention that here in Brazil, Tom, as you know, there are a lot of mergers and acquisitions with U.S. companies, and also I heard that the first declination under mergers and acquisitions policy launched last year. The DOJ announced it would not prosecute white deer management after the company voluntarily disclosed sanctions and export violations by a company it bought in 2020. And that is a topic that I always want to mention to you that we would like to discuss, because that's one of the things that we do a lot here, the mergers and acquisitions due diligence. So the white deer case caught my attention. If you care to elaborate.
So that was a case through a very unusual set of circumstances, acerbated by the pandemic and everything that entailed. U.S. company buys a company. Turns out they were doing business with Cuba, Iran, and North Korea, all very big no-nos in the United States. They discovered it. It took them a while to figure it out after they bought the company, because they couldn't do an on-site forensic investigation during the pandemic. They got the information, turned it over to the Department of Justice, fired all the people involved, gave the DOJ the people's names. They prosecuted the individuals, and the company got a full declination. It's a very interesting case, very instructive, very unique set of facts, because of that point in time in 2020 and 2021, we hopefully will never see again.
Correct.
Isabel, I have a board meeting in 3 minutes,
Sure,
so
I
I
know.
need to
Okay.
make this, I need to say my goodbyes.
I know. Well, because he really has to go, we'll announce very soon the next edition. We never know. It may be another special edition. And so we don't have the dates yet. So thank you so much, Tom, for your wonderful explanations that are so useful to all of us here in Brazil. And we look forward to hearing more about your podcast in Portuguese. So, Cynthia, your last words?
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, everyone. And I hope to see you all soon.
Thanks, guys and
Thanks.
gals.
Bye.
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 Bye.